Hi guys, another one in this little series I'm doing, answering the points that Andrew raised on the video about the clothyard shaft. Now the next point he raised was saying that the reason why arrows were getting shorter towards the mid-1500s, the Mary Rose time, coming down from the 36-inch shaft that he thinks people shot to the 32 and shorter, was because there was a shortage of materials. Not so. There wasn't. Now, when you say that we started making arrows out of sawn lumber, or timber as we would call it rather than lumber, you're correct, we did. But not for the reason that you seem to think. We didn't do it because coppiced woods were becoming in short supply. That's not the way the coppicing works, and certainly not the reason why we started using sawn timber or like full-size trees. See, the way coppicing, the first thing you've got to understand is the way coppicing works. So say you've got an ash woodland, an ash forest of say 500 trees. What you do is you divide them up into lots. Well, to make it easy, we'll say there's 700 trees. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut down 100 trees each year. And the reason for that is when you cut down, and bear in mind, every single, as far as I know, every single native wood or tree species in England can be coppiced. Even oak, ash, rowan, wych elm, poplar, beech, birch, whitebeam, hornbeam, London plane, they can all be coppiced. And the way you do it is you go into the forest and you simply chop a tree down. So you would go into your forest of 700 trees and chop 100 trees down. And you take that wood away, and we're using ash, so you could turn that into shafts for tools, for weapons. You could turn that into bows. You could turn it into arrows. You can turn it into charcoal for the local blacksmith. You can just use it as firewood. You can do anything like with that now. You can use it as building materials. Do whatever you want with it. And what's going to happen next is that during the next growing season, you will notice around those stumps, you leave the stumps about 1 foot high. It's called a stool. You leave them and you will notice that new shoots will grow from the base of the tree. And that could be anything, depending on the diameter of the tree you cut down, could be anything up to 50 new shoots. So you come back the next day. Now this is going to take about 7 years because ash it coppices on a 7-year cycle. You come back the next year and you notice the first 100 you cut down, the shoots are a little bit longer. They're maybe 1 foot long. You chop another 100 trees down. You come back the next year, the first lot you cut down were maybe 2 or 3 foot high, and the second lot were maybe 1 foot high. And you cut another 100 trees down, and you do that until all the trees have been cut down. And all that wood that you cut, all that lumber that you sawed, you take it away, do whatever you need to do with it. Build with it, make bows with it, make arrows with it, make boats with it, make ships, do whatever you need to do with it. And then, on the 7th year, the 8th year, you come back and you go to the first lot of trees you cut down, the first 100 trees, and you will notice that in an ash forest you will have anywhere, depending on the size of the tree you cut down originally, anything up to 40 or 50 canes growing, 50 shoots growing out of each stump. Now each of those, by that time, those ash canes are going to be nice and straight and about 8 to 10 foot tall, and they're going to be just over ½ an inch in diameter. So you cut them back and you stack them, put them somewhere nice to dry, and out of those 100 trees, if you've got 40 canes off each tree that are each about 8 foot long, you've got yourself 8,000 arrow shafts off 1 year's woodland. The next year you'll get another 8,000. The next year another 8,000. So you've got, over the next 7 years, you've got 8,000 shafts a year. Okay, it doesn't sound like much, but if you will think about the amount of woodland that was available in the 13th century for coppicing in England, excuse me, oh, blow my brains out. It adds up. And this is why hundreds of thousands of arrows could be made every year. Because if you've got 10 woodlands producing 8,000 arrow shafts each, and you've got 10 forests the same size, that's 80,000 forests, that's 80,000 arrows a year, before you've even started on the other stuff. And these coppiced forests last for a long time. And I mean, for instance, within 10 miles of where I am now, I can think of 4 coppiced forests. One of them is still active today. It's a willow one. It's within about 5 miles of here. It's a willow coppice. It's not used to produce arrow shafts or anything like that, but it is used to produce charcoal for artists, still does today. The other ones I can think of, they've gone to rack and ruin, but they could be brought back. But anyway, the one that's about 5 miles away, I had a conversation with one of the guys who works there 5-6 years ago, and the forest, it turns out, the forest, that particular coppice, is nearly 600 years old, been in almost continuous use for 600 years, up until I think he said the 1860s, the 1870s. When for whatever reason they didn't need as much, so they just stopped. But it was brought back into use in the 1960s and has been recoppiced and reused ever since to make artist charcoal. So it's an ongoing managed resource, and almost every woodland in England in the 1300s, apart from the great forests like Nottingham and places like well, Sherwood, places like that, were coppiced. So there we go. Now, you said that the reason why they stopped, the reason why they started chopping trees down and making arrows from sawn lumber, from sawn timber, was because the coppicing wasn't producing enough wood. That's not true. What was actually happening was, A, they were starting the new coppices off, and B, they needed heavier arrows to use against the types of armour that were starting to be worn from the 1400s onwards. People were starting, they weren't using just mail and padded jackets so much. They were starting to wear breastplates and helmets and pollines and cuisses and things like that. So heavier arrows were needed to do the job that they'd always done. That was the thinking. So instead of pausing the coppicing system, because you could do it, but it would take a couple of years, because basically what you've got to do is not cut the coppice for another year or another 2 years until the canes reach the thickness you need. So you can do it, it just takes an extra couple of years. So what they did instead is they started new coppices by taking out bigger trees, full-grown trees, cutting them into staves, and then turning them into arrows, so they could make heavier arrows. Simple as that. So there wasn't a shortage of wood, it was just that they started using the wood they had in a different way. Now you mentioned not being able to use pine and things like that. There's something you haven't thought about though. Medieval forests in England weren't pine. They were almost exclusively deciduous, as in hardwood, oak, rowan, beech, ash. They weren't pine. We had very few pine forests in medieval England. There were pine forests in northern Scotland, but very few in England. Most of the wood we had was deciduous. So the knotty pine problem that you suggested just wasn't an issue because we didn't have pine trees and we didn't make arrows from pine. We used hardwoods. Most commonly for arrows was ash, mountain ash, rowan, that sort of thing. So your argument falls flat on its face, I'm afraid. We didn't use, which I mean, you said that the reason why arrows got shorter, the 32 inches, was because once you get past 32 inches on a pine tree, you start to get lots and lots of branches coming off, so you get lots and lots of knots. That's true, you do. But it's not an issue if you're not using pine. Like I said, we had very few pine forests in England. We do now. We've got pine forests all over the place now because they are a planted import, and there have been since around about, I think it's as late as 1860, 1870. It's a relatively modern import, most of which came from Scandinavia. Before the 1800s, we didn't have pine forests, or a great deal of pine forests. There were some things like spruces, like Scots pine, things like that, but they're not your typical pine trees. They are more akin to the North American redwood trees, where they grow tall and straight with very few low-lying branches. But we didn't use them really for making arrows. We used them for construction more than anything else. So anyway, so that's the whole knotty wood thing. Now, I was going to say something else there, but I distracted myself. What was it? Must have been a lie. I was talking about the types of wood we had, wasn't I? Oh, never mind, it's gone. Must have been a lie. So there we go. So we didn't have a shortage of wood. We didn't have problems finding wood for making trees. We didn't have to resort to cutting down tree like pine and things like that because we didn't have pine. We started cutting trees and making arrows from sawn lumber or timber because we wanted heavier shafts. That's it, pure and simple. So it's an interesting subject. I'm glad you brought it up. Anyway, hope you found that interesting. Stay safe, keep slinging the sticks, and we'll talk again soon. Cheers, guys.